Hi, everyone. If I haven't met you before, my name is John Hinman. I am the Director of Learning and Performance Improvement with Tooling U-SME. I have been with the organization for 12 years, and I'll kind of talk through what I've seen in those 12 years. But one of the things that we have been asked throughout the years since the initial TUX feels like 30 years ago was benchmarking. Getting folks in the room and really understanding where you sit in the maturity of your learning and development programs versus your peers. So we're going to do a little bit of that today. So instead of me just pure lecturing, especially after lunch when everyone kind of is looking for their little bit of a nap, we're going to make this more interactive. And we're going to use some live surveying and then also look for immediate feedback from folks in these top criteria on world-class learning and development programs. So we're going to do a couple things. I'll be introducing each one of the criteria. We're going to allow you to rate yourself within the app on where your organization sits. We can see the live results coming up on the screen for each one of those. And then I am going to tell you what I've seen in the last 12 years, and most recently, where I see manufacturing sitting through this SWOT analysis of that particular criteria. So we're going to make this a little more interactive. This way, maybe we'll stay within the hour, maybe not, depends on the feedback and the conversation that we do have. As Dan mentioned, I lead our learning services team. So we are the folks that go out there and help manufacturing apply these best practices to really elevate their programs towards best in class. So in those 12 years, as I mentioned, there's pretty much three categories that I have seen with manufacturing, learning, and development. And it goes into the good, the bad, and the ugly. Now, I was pausing to see if anyone was actually going to sing the song or whistle the song on it. Yeah, there you go. Thank you. Crowd participation. I appreciate that. All right. So again, this week, yesterday, today, we've seen a lot of good. And that is fantastic. We have a lot of great programs that are out there, and a lot of the focus on some of the presentations was about pipeline, community, bringing people into your facilities. But it's important for manufacturing then to be able to train, qualify, develop, and ultimately retain those individuals. And that's really what we're going to be focusing on in this session, is how to train, develop, qualify, and keep all those practices together. So when I look at my 12 years of going to hundreds of manufacturing facilities, I've seen some good, but mostly and recently, I've seen the bad and I've seen the ugly. So when we start to look in the mirror and really reflect to see where we stand, this is where benchmarking and building this community of practice, which we are doing over this next couple days, to really push ourselves towards best-in-class, world-class attributes. So what we're going to be doing and is understand how are we doing. So look at that good, bad, and the ugly and really understand what's going on. And we had a few statistics out there. I'm just going to throw some based on the Work Institute puts out a retention report every year. So I kind of want to set the tone on things that we're seeing based on statistics coming from that. 37% increase in quit rates in 2014. That seems like a low number, doesn't it? That's because this crosses all industries. I look at these numbers that come from the Work Institute, and I look at manufacturing, you could probably multiply it 2.5, and then you probably get your real number in manufacturing. 35% of those individuals that quit within that first year. So again, that first year is really important, and when we see some of the presentations on great career pathways, that's really an important piece to be able to get them past that first year and keep them in the organization long term. 37% of those individuals are gone in the first 90 days. So again, when we start looking at some of those good onboarding programs, some of those discussions that we had, those first 90 days are key to be able to hold on to someone. So we could have all these great pipelines and community practices and start bringing people in the door. If we're not prepared to accept them and make them part of our culture and invest in developing them, we're going to turn those people over. This is a big one. How many people actually count a metric and report a metric out for cost of hire? Show of hands. How many folks? Not many. This is a big metric that should alone drive your leaders to put together great learning and development programs. That's a big number. That's a lot of zeros when you look at the cost of losing your employees. So cost to hire is a metric that needs to be brought to the big table as something to recognize. And we listened to Matt earlier today, and it's all about production numbers and improving those key metrics. This should be one of those metrics that we look at on a regular basis to report up, because we need to, this number is just going to increase as we keep turning over individuals. Through that report, and we heard a little bit about this earlier as well, career growth, promotion, achievement are reasons, top reasons why people are leaving the organization. So again, when we start breaking down these attributes and seeing where you stand in these attributes, that career growth is very important to be part of your program. We saw a great career pathway earlier today from American Axle. Those are the things that should be put in place for folks to be able to see where they're going to be long-term within the organization and get past that first year. Health and family shows up, work-life balance. I could spend an hour talking about work-life balance on how shift work is not really conducive to the population that's coming in the door, and we've got to figure that out. Also, fastest growing reason for employees leaving: job stress, training, lack of empowerment. These are all pieces that we need to address as manufacturers to be able to avoid this. This is a quote that I pulled, and I can't remember who this came from or how long ago it was, but it's somewhat in the recent past. But this was a quote coming from a site leader at a Fortune 500 that I was talking to. He said, not only are we having trouble attracting new workers, but we have no visibility as who's going to show up every day, making it impossible to meet our production goals. Manufacturing can't keep living the way they're living right now. It's a fire drill like the one we had today. We need to make sure that we're investing in these programs because we can't sustain at this level. It's just going to get worse unless we start to really build out these programs. And that's why we want to introduce World Class. We want to introduce attributes that you should be considering as you design out your programs and ultimately grade yourselves against these practices where we have rooms for improvement. So we're going to talk about the various elements that make up World Class. We're going to ask you to take your SME Plus app, as Dan mentioned, click on this session, and then there's a button within that says interactive chat. Once you have that opened up, we will be pushing questions to you to be able to benchmark you against criteria that we're going to be discussing. So that's going to be an interactive session. Also, after we get that session, we see the feedback, we have our microphones that are around the room that are available if you have a story of good, bad, or the ugly. We'd love you to share that as well in that particular category. Okay. Yes. All right. So when I work with organizations, I try to see where they currently sit and reside in terms of a maturity model for high impact learning. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but I think every organization should really know where they stand as far as how they're progressing in best practices on learning and development. And there's everything from the incidental training and job preparedness all the way through really understanding organizational capability development. And each one of these levels, there's different stakeholders that have a viewpoint of that learning. So it's really important to really understand where you currently fit and express that and communicate that to your leaders so they really know what the output of the current state of the program is. And most times when I'm working with companies, they're sitting at that lower level of the incidental training and job preparedness, where it's very reactive type of approach, informal, job shadowing, those types of things. So when I go out and I look at the 10 criteria towards world class, it kind of fits into this, so I have an understanding where those companies kind of sit within a maturity model. So again, I'm not spending time on this particular, but I'm going to talk about those elements that I look at and you should be looking at in terms of high world-class attributes. So the first one that we're going to be talking about in dissecting is learning and supportive culture, what kind of culture you have in place. And again, we're going to go through each of these individually. So I'm going to run down the top 10 just to kind of give you an idea what you'll be answering as far as the survey items. Define job profiles and qualifications. Strategic content alignment. Peer training, we heard about that a lot. Standardizing your on-the-job training, who's doing that on-the-job training. Big piece that we look at when we're benchmarking organizations. Measurement and evaluation. Are you actually ensuring not only individual knowledge transfer, skill transfer, but are you measuring your program as well? Just-in-time learning. We have to understand that we can't teach everyone everything in one moment. We need a system in order to keep information fresh and get information to individuals when they need it. Career development progression, we heard a lot about that today. That is a big one that we look at. Human performance improvement initiatives. Sometimes we need to work outside of our training bubble to be able to improve human performance. That means process improvements. That means working with quality, engineering, all those folks, because sometimes, guess what? Even though they blame training all the time, it's not a training issue. And we need to make sure that we're partnered with the right individuals to look at human performance outside of just training and looking at non-training issues as well. Learning infrastructure. We're going to bust this out a little bit deeper in people, process, and policy. The 3 Ps that I call it. Infrastructure is key to success and make sure that is a sustainable and maintained program over time. And our last one is social learning and communications. So what we're going to end up doing on this, for each one of these 10, I'm going to give you a very brief description of what that is. I'm going to give some bullet points of good success that companies have in place for each one of these. Then we are going to push that to the survey where we have strength, weakness, opportunity, and threat that you can rate yourself. We will get live data back, hopefully. And then I will tell you what I've seen in industry and see where that falls into place. So the first one, we're going to try this with our first one here. This is our pilot attribute. So learning and supportive culture. Does your culture embrace, encourage training, and integrate learning into business processes every day? And we've heard already, even through Matt's open discussion about the AdCore program and some of the other discussions that we heard, how does the company embrace your training program? Are they allowing you to let your people train, or is productivity taking over that training initiative? So companies that do this well, leaders see the value of employee development as a key factor to their competitiveness in the marketplace. So they own it. They know human capital is really important to them long term, and they're ready to make that commitment, and nothing should get in that way. Training and development activities take priority over production when it is scheduled. So at the end of the day, if there is a training moment scheduled, nothing interferes with that. I've seen companies that put tape around a training event just so no one gets in there. So those are the types of things that we need to make sure that when training is scheduled, training happens. The employee learning and development program is clearly communicated, is fully integrated on how the business is done at the company. Communication at the beginning, in the middle, and the end of these programs, and continuous after it launches, is the most important thing that you can do. Because as operations folks, they tend to gloss over and move forward away from training and development programs. So we have to stay on top of that with good communications on how this is ultimately succeeding. All levels of supervision employees drive the learning experience. So when we're building a really good, strong learning culture, everyone contributes to learning. So when we have new opportunities for learning, individuals should be pulling people that probably don't know that new information into that learning experience, so then everyone ultimately is becoming a developer, mentor, learner. I'm not saying official peer trainer, but building that learning environment, knowledge sharing, those types of things. So again, this is our first attribute, a little bit of information around the culture side of this. And what we're going to ask you to do is open up your app, and we're going to rate your current organization against learning and supportive culture. So you will either click the actual application. If you do not have the app, you can use your phone and scan this QR code, but we would prefer you use the app if you have that app available. So we're going to go back, and if you could jump back to the prior slide. Nope. All right, perfect. All right. So again, on your app, we're going to give you a second to do your strength, weakness, opportunity, and then we're going to go live to the results to actually see that. Okay, you can go ahead and switch and see what it looks like. Okay. There we go. All right, awesome. All right. So it looks like the numbers have come in, and it looks like they are changing, as I love live data. Okay, it's still changing. All right, we'll give everyone like another second straight. We have a few strengths. That's a lot more strengths than I actually anticipated. It's going down, though. All right, it's going down, yes. All right, so it looks like the majority is there's an opportunity for this, which is a good thing, because if I hear there's an opportunity, that means that your leadership is open to really changing a culture. But there could be some more convincing in that particular opportunity there for them. So good stuff. This is how we're going to work it. If anyone has any kind of feedback or story, raise your hand real quick and we'll get a microphone over to you on your current situation with your leaders. Anyone want to share anything? Okay, nothing on that one. Maybe on the next one. All right. So we're going to switch back then, and I'm going to give you kind of my view of where I see manufacturing in this area. I see it as a major threat. From a lot of the organizations that we are working with, this is the biggest challenge right now, for the fact that we have so much turnover and turmoil with the workforce right now, that productivity is becoming the number one action for a lot of these manufacturers. So we have a lot of work to do from a communication aspect to be able to go up to our leadership and really drive this type of learning culture. So again, this is a big deal. We could have the best program in the world. We're going to have a question up here, Denise. We could have the best program in the world. If our leaders do not buy into this, it can get shut down in a very quick fashion. Go ahead.
It's more of a comment. When leadership acts and says that they are supportive when in fact everything that they do is not.
Yes. Yes, we've heard a lot of that too. So again, communication, value, what's the return on investment? How are you going to improve key performance metrics? All those things have to be in the equation to be able to get this support sometimes. So this is a big deal. Okay, I'm going to jump to the next one. Define job profiles and qualifications. Do you use job profiles and associated competencies to allow leaders to have productive conversations around skills gap, performance management, talent acquisition, and career development? So these are the next things that folks do well when they do this right. Employees become accountable with clear understanding of job responsibilities. How many times do our job descriptions not match what they actually do on a daily basis? And that's where we need to make sure those expectations are set so there's no miscommunication with those individuals once they go out on the floor and understand what they're developing towards and ultimately what we're holding them accountable for as their qualifications. Employee development plans are well defined and presented to the employees. A lot of times on our onboarding, we just take them and we throw them out of there after their 2 hours of orientation without a development plan in place. So we really need to take the time to say, hey, this is what we're doing in week 1. This is what we're doing in week 2. This is how we're going to get you to where we need to be in week 32. So having that plan in place is really important. Shared organizational competencies allow for smoother career development. When you start to look through your entire organization, break your jobs down, you're able to really understand how you can cross-train better with common skills that allow you then to use common tools and training to be able to elevate your workforce. So this is really important from an enterprise or a company-wide perspective to look at these profiles, not only the individual job assignment, but also how that bubbles up to other roles within your organization. So really important to get to that definition. The organization can clearly see workforce skill gaps for today and tomorrow. When we really do a good job identifying skills with our profiles, your leaders, who again we're trying to get buy-in to the programs, can understand where skills gaps are through assessment, through evaluations, whatever the tool is, but ultimately they will be able to understand where they need to develop their people for today or smart manufacturing tomorrow. So we need to make sure that we really identify those skill pieces. And then ultimately supervisors will have a tool to evaluate and discuss performance. When we have job profiles and really strong qualifications in place, it starts to allow everyone to have conversations on the same sheet of paper, and ultimately performance management becomes a better conversation than the gray that happens when you don't have these things in place. So again, this is our second attribute. We're going to go and get our survey again for defined job profiles and qualifications, see how everyone's doing here in the room as a benchmark. Seems like weakness is taking the lead on this one. I just thought of horse racing for some reason. I don't know why. Okay. All right. So it looks like weakness. It's a weakness in the room here. Let's see what industry benchmarking kind of looks like as well. Hey, we matched up. So I've seen this as a real weakness. They're out there. Folks are doing it, but are they doing it well enough to get a lot of those results that we were just looking at? So again, profiles, qualifications. I always say, how can you achieve an end goal if you don't define what that end goal is? And that's what these job profiles and qualifications really represent. You cannot successfully measure success unless you've done this part. You're just spinning in a circle chasing your tail. Next, strategic content alignment. Do you make strong and efficient business decisions in acquiring, developing, and distributing the right content to the right people when taking development time away from production. So this is a big deal. If we have a bunch of folks that are arguing that they can't take their people away from production to train, boy, we better make sure that that training counts when we do take them away from production. So making sure that we're making the right decisions on what content that we're putting out there is a hugely important piece. And there's a few things that I want you to consider when folks do it well. Learners don't eat the elephant in one bite. So we need to make sure that we're not jamming 2 days of information into someone and expect them to recall all of that information outside of that 2 days. We need to strategically think how we are going to nugget the information over time and stop trying to stick a 30-year veteran's mind into someone in a week. It's not possible. So we have to come up with better ways to distribute the content over time to eventually get those individuals to that level that we ultimately want them from. Training is designed as role-based and is managed so training is not irrelevant or redundant. So again, when we look at our job profiles, we should have training strategies specifically for that job profile. So folks are not taking training that they don't need, or for some reason they're taking that deja vu moment of, didn't I already take this class somewhere? So we want to make sure that that is a very well role-defined training strategy. We need to make sure that we look at adult learning styles. And this is something that manufacturing's really bad at, where they believe that we just have to do it the way we always did it. We're just gonna either throw someone in a classroom for a week and do orientation or bore them to death with PowerPoints, and then we're just gonna throw them on the floor. We need to consider adult learning styles. People learn differently, and it's not going to be acceptable for us not to consider that with the next generation of worker coming in the door. So adult learning styles, hybrid programs, mix it up a little bit. No 16 hours of facilitated PowerPoint. It's just not going to work anymore. We need to consider better, more practical, blended ways to distribute that information. Return on investment is considered when deciding the best learning methodology. So ROI, when we're figuring out, do we build this content ourselves? Do we outsource it? Do we purchase it? That has to be strategic decision making to make sure that we're providing the best ROI on our program to our stakeholders. Okay, now we're going to go to strategic content alignment. We're going to do our SWOT on that particular element and see where we stand. Oh, look at that. Someone jumped in right away and they said, oh, we got this one. I saw yeah, now we're dropping, yes. Okay, looks like we have an opportunity for that one. Yep, that seems to be our winner. Anyone want to comment on this? Is this a difficult element to accomplish, to get that content right? Anyone have any thoughts on that? Okay, in the front, Denise.
I guess a question, but also a comment, is I found a lot of times companies have the onboarding. They'll give a series of links and different attributes the person has to learn, and then they don't have the backup of as far as training in each of those links. What I see sometimes is certification or training programs might have 10 different concepts, but maybe the employee only needs 4 of them for the job role they're doing.
Yep.
So those are things as far as disseminating and identifying which one of those links they need and which one of those, the breadth of the training that they actually require for their job role.
Absolutely. No, you are dead on. And when you start to understand what those individual job profiles are, you can make those right decisions because no one wants to take those extra classes. One more, Denise, up here. Yep, thank you. You can cross the line, Denise. Don't be afraid.
So the strategic content alignment kind of also goes back to the defined job profiles. So in thinking about this, I feel like this is a weakness for a lot of companies, because how do we manage this when the job roles themselves are very fluid right now and consistently changing? It requires so much time and energy to constantly go back and look at the job profiles to determine where do we need to realign to the strategic goals, and then realign the training to those new job profiles. So I feel like it's always in fluid motion, and nobody is ever perfect at that.
Yes, you're exactly right. Your profiles will change. There's no doubt about that, which will require new training. And when you look at any training program and the evaluation cycle of any training program, there should never be an expectation that you're done. You're never done. Our industry changes too much, and you're always improving your training programs based on feedback that you're getting from the different layers of evaluation tools that you're putting in place. So you're right, you're never going to be perfect, but just being aware that those profiles are going to change is the first step to recovery on that. Okay, thank you. Okay, industry benchmark, we fall in opportunity there as well. So a lot of folks have a lot of great content out there, but are they utilizing it? Or do they have too much content? Are they really driving it to the profiles? Are they overspending on content? Is their content not specific enough to their processes? Those are all things to think about as you get into that ultimate strategic content alignment towards your profiles. Yes?
I was just thinking, we don't have this figured out yet, but I think some of the conversation we had earlier about artificial intelligence and trying to use AI around, there's a lot of discussion right now, and I think to the last question, thanks Denise, to the last question regarding job profiles is the conversation around skills, right? Really when we focus on, more bite size, like you said about the elephant, the identification of a new skill and the quick ability to attach that to the right curriculum at the right time for the right skill. Because the fluidity of jobs is going to almost be impossible to chase the other way, I think it has to be broken down a little bit more into the bite size of skills. And you hear a lot of conversations around the skills passport and things like that. What I was mentioning earlier today about how do you really look and start to carry more versus a resume, almost like a skills, a skills identifier. And I think we'll start to see that with the matchup between that and using AI around content and linking those up a lot more quickly for I think the question that was asked too.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Janine. Yeah, we could talk more about micro skills and micro credentialing and how to roll that into your profiles and your competency frameworks. That could be. We'll see you in 2 years, and we'll talk about that. All right, peer training. Do you formalize and structure the on-the-job training learning experience to train and qualify workers for their work experience? So folks that do this well have qualified and dedicated peer trainers who are instructing the actual training on the floor. And I've heard some of that over the last couple of days on some folks that really do that well. Through this process, we have to capture that organizational knowledge. So understanding the whys behind the steps and put that through standardized documentation. If we don't do that, that knowledge still resides in our peer trainers, and our peer trainers will not be with the organization forever. So that whys behind the steps, the organizational knowledge, is extremely important to have that best-in-class peer trainer program. Time to competency is well-defined and executed to plan. So again, we should be able to understand how long it should take through a standardized process of on-the-job training to be able to get that time to competency reduced, of course, from where it was, but also keep that on plan as well. And again, for us to be able to maximize our time off production, having this really well defined is super important to make sure that we're on track. If we tell our leaders that it takes 2 weeks to get someone, we better get it done in 2 weeks. If it goes into 3 weeks, then we start having problems. So making sure that this is really well defined is extremely important to get us to that world-class status. Opportunity-based training is part of the culture because everything can't be taught at one time. So even how many times in on-the-job training do we have a situation where, well, they only do that every 9 months, so we can't teach that. So that means that we have a qualification that's probably in place, but still there's this stranded knowledge that still needs to be transferred into that individual eventually. So opportunity-based training is something that needs to be implemented and managed and understood through good profiling that ultimately we're still considering this person qualified, but there's still some outstanding stuff that they have to go over until they're that 30-year vet. So organizing that information and making sure your peer trainers understand opportunity-based training and they execute on it whenever it comes into play. So that's a really big piece of standardizing this informal training that we've seen throughout the years. Okay, peer training. So we're going to do our SWOT on peer training. We're going to push the next one. There we go. So go ahead and rate yourselves on where we sit with peer training or on-the-job training, who's doing it, how they're successfully doing it. Looks like there's some opportunity for some improvement on there. Weakness just took number 2 in our list. And strength, weakness, kind of tied up. All right, so it looks like we have a little opportunity to improve that area, which again, I think in manufacturing, if we don't standardize and have strong peer training programs, everything we do on the front end could fall apart. So we could do a really great job with initial training, our onboarding could be great, but if we don't solve that whys behind the steps and make that part of organizational knowledge and structuring that process, all of a sudden things start going downhill, including making sure that we have peer trainers that want to train people, understand adults, and ultimately do a great job representing the organization. So that peer training selection is super important. Let's see how industry benchmarked. It bounced down to a threat. Again, I think this is one of those key elements that we have to have figured out and in place. If we don't have that figured out in place, we're wasting our time on the front end. So this is a critical piece. Okay, measurement and evaluation. Do you use various measurement tools to validate learning success for the individual and the program's impact on the business? And again, that's 2 things. We're measuring not only individual growth, learning outcomes for those individuals, but we also have to measure the program and make sure that we're meeting the goals of the program. So assessments are used to verify transfer for all learning modules. You don't know how many times I talk to companies and they put them through hours and hours of training and there's no test. How do you know whether or not someone actually learned what you just taught them? And I know there's situations where we have union facilities and some other facilities that really don't like tests. Don't call it a test. Call it something else. You need to make sure that the training is effective and people are learning. Job skills are evaluated through ongoing demonstration before and after qualification. So again, we talked and heard earlier about qualification checklist, demonstrated skills, making sure those pieces are in place. Extremely important to make sure those trends continue. So don't just qualify someone once. You're going to have to circle back around. I'm all about requalifications on individuals. Every few years, circle back around and make sure those skills are still there. Folks aren't getting lazy, taking shortcuts. That's where we need to make sure that those things are in place. Feedback tools are integrated into the culture to ensure the program is meeting the needs of the individual and the business. I am big into feedback. Feedback on day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4, continuing through their entire development, because we need to make sure this program is where it should be. To our point earlier, continuous improvement, evaluation. You're always going to need to tweak these programs, and feedback channels will allow you to do it. And then finally, communication to leaders on capability and capacity of the workforce development success with qualitative and quantitative data. So we need to report back to our leaders how we're progressing and where our gaps are. And ultimately, what programs should we focus on based on where the leaders want to take us in the future as well. This is measurement tools and evaluation that can help that. So again, two things. We have our individuals and we have program execution. Oh, one more. Financial impact. Phillips 5-level model evaluation. Talk about that offline if you need to, but having an actual financial ROI that you can bring back to your leaders and tell them how successful this program is, including your cost to hire decrease. Okay, measurement and evaluation. Let's go ahead and do a SWOT on where you stand with measurement and evaluation. Weakness, opportunity, weakness. Okay. All right, so we seem to be circling between weakness and an opportunity. Might be a little bit of weakness, area for improvement. That's great. Okay, let's jump back and see how we did on industry. This is an opportunity that we recognize in industry as well. On the content's there, the assessments just aren't there. So it's not hard to look at that content and just ensure that our folks are actually learning what they should be learning, and ultimately having those feedback channels and those measurement instruments in place to be able to make sure that the program is super successful. Just-in-time learning. Do you embrace performance support tools and systems to provide training the moment it is needed by the workforce? Folks that do this well make smart decisions when they're trying to look at formal training versus just-in-time training. Don't spend time off the manufacturing floor training on something that someone will never be able to memorize. Why not use performance support and save that training time and put it directly accessible on the floor through some type of even old school placard or through some kind of device digital technology. So don't waste that training time if you can put that information out through a performance support device. Look at native or universal language to support the training when it's required. We heard a little bit about, in one of our roundtables, about language. And this is going to be a real issue that we all need to think about if you're not experiencing it already, what we're going to do in terms of building our materials in the future. I really think it's got to be less words. It has to be more visual. And performance support allows us to really do that because it's very, very visual application of certain processes, videos, whatever we need to do because we are going to have a very diverse workforce that we need to consider and not just write 9 million different versions of text-based documents based on the languages that we're looking at. Digital systems are in place to distribute information to the employee when and where they need it. So having those systems in place, moving away from paper, and ultimately making that a possibility. Use performance support that needs to be, when it needs to be recalled, if information's been changed, and if new information is needed after that initial training. So again, putting it in the right position to be able to get it there. Let's jump to the poll. All right, so how does your organization rank in terms of just-in-time learning? Wow, we went from strength to weakness real fast. Okay. All right, so we have some opportunity, a little bit of weakness on there. Okay, good. Yeah, so this is something to really consider when you're looking at your content strategy, what's formal, what's performance support, how to make that all work. Okay, let's go ahead and jump to industry and see what they're looking for. There's a threat there. Not a lot of folks are doing it. I think we went through a period of time where no one wanted anything on the production floor. They wanted their clean production floors. They didn't want anything out there. But I think that had something to do with really hindering the workforce in being able to access information that they need as well. So, career development, progression. Do you have career pathways? We talked a lot about this. I'll kind of go through the bullet points real quick. Skill-determined progression, not tenure. Clear development plans are in place to show growth opportunities. Formal mentors are part of the organizational talent development of the individuals. Future leaders are earmarked by the company and developed according to plan. So go ahead and rank your career development progression and see how you're sitting there. And I know some folks are going to make this a strength because we saw some of those cases today. Okay. Yeah, it seems like this room is probably ahead of the curve on some of these things, where I've seen some struggles in some other areas. Okay, let's go ahead and jump to the industry. Okay, this is an opportunity for them on the progression, career development aspect of it.
John, yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
So, John, Jason Scales with Skills USA.
Hey, Jason.
I can kind of help think about context in this a little bit. Prior to coming to Skills USA, I was with Lincoln Electric, global welding company, and ran the global education side. We were in a rail car manufacturing facility. They produced enough rail cars to hire 1,200 welders in that one facility. They brought in welders from outwards of 80 kilometers away just to have in that facility, and they were rolling through 120 welders a month. Mm-hmm. They could not keep people. And so they asked us to come in. They said, hey, we have this huge problem. We just need to look at this. What can you do to help us? And we'll give you full access. You can have all the records. You can look at everything. Just look at everything. Okay, no problem. Came in. So we started in like the welding training center. And historically with welding, we got to do everything from zero to hero. Mm-hmm. And so they went to a 6-week welding program prior to ever getting onto the floor. When you audited what's going on the floor on the welding, 80% of the welds were in one position, a 2F, which is a flat weld.
So it was too much.
And they're taking them all the way to a 4F overhead weld in qualification and training.
Yep.
And we went in and we talked to them. We said, look, if you would just go and classify all the job sites in the location and make cells, then you transition your people out of a 2-week training program at 2F, put them on the non-critical welds, get their self-efficacy, make them confident, get them going, and then start working them around the floor and build up their skills with on-job training. You can actually increase your retention rates, decrease your rework rates, and do all this stuff. That was 4 months ago. Do you think they did anything?
Probably not.
No, nothing. Nothing. They're still rolling through welders. They're still bringing them in. The challenge isn't because they didn't have the tools, they didn't have the want, they didn't have the need. They didn't believe they had the time to take a pause to really do the work that's going to allow them to be more productive. And then they were very fearful of the change. If I make this change, what's it going to do to the other welders on the floor? What's it going to do to this? And how is it going to impact the overall training? But yet they still have a problem. Yep. And so I think, thinking of this long term, when you think about all these attributes, it's incremental changes that you can take place. But with the learners we have today, the talks that we had yesterday, the different types of learners, everybody got a trophy. Everybody needs a high five every day. You can't put them in situations where they fail immediately. And that's what they were doing in this rail car yard. They were failing and then walking out the door. Yep. And so that's a little anecdotal story.
I think that sums up strategic content alignment really well on that. Thank you. Thank you. All right, so we're running short on time, so I'm going to advance a little quicker on this. I'll do 1 or 2 more, and then for the social learning, you can always reach back to me afterwards, and we'll talk about that. Human performance improvement, this is what I mentioned before, that sometimes it's not a training issue. And we need to make sure that in training and development, learning and development, talent development, whichever function that you're in, that you're working with the other functions within manufacturing to make sure that there's human performance improvements and not necessarily always just a training issue. So if there's a blueprint that doesn't have enough information, if there is a machine that's just constantly not working properly. Those are the types of things that affect human performance. That is not really a training issue, but those stakeholders need to be part of the table to be able to get that information. So again, that's a really important one to think about. Not a lot of folks think. They go in their little silos, where this really looks across the silos to really understand what's hampering human performance expectations for those jobs themselves. And I'm curious about this one, so I definitely want to get some feedback from the group on human performance improvement. If you're actually partnering and getting these partnerships together to identify where human performance can improve. So we have some opportunity, a little bit of weakness. Some folks are doing it. Opportunity for improvement on there. Okay, excellent. From my side on industry, I see that as an opportunity as well. Not a lot of folks are doing it. We're still working on silo, but it's time to really break that down. Okay, so I'm running a little bit short on my time. I have a minute, so I'm going to quickly just tell you a little bit about infrastructure. So there's certain things that you should have with your infrastructure. You need the right people in place. So you need to have that structure. Matt talked about a structure earlier where there was a manager, there was more technical leads, there were peer trainers. So you need to figure out your structure for your individuals to be able to maintain and sustain this program. The process side of things, you need to make sure your processes are standardized. If you haven't validated work instructions or you haven't validated your standard work in 30 years, guess what? It's probably not validated. So we need to make sure that we have that standardized in place before you train someone towards a qualification that holds those work instructions in place. So making sure you have your processes locked down before you hold someone accountable to train towards those processes. So that's a big piece. And then policy, the third P, is really important to execute the plan sometimes. Sometimes you have to write a policy for people to actually follow the plan, and that sometimes can help you with getting folks off the production floor to go to those training pieces because there's a policy statement that says we will be doing these things. So again, more information on that. If you would like some offline, just connect with me on the learning infrastructure side. The third piece is the social learning. Again, I can reach out to you on that one as well. That's a whole discussion on how we utilize things that people use all the time in this younger generation to be able to communicate, have better communication, and utilize some really effective tools that are out there as well. But I am on my time right now. If anyone has any questions or wanted to talk through it, I appreciate the benchmark data that you gave us today. And anything else that you'd like to discuss, I'll be hanging around the hallway, or you can connect with me afterwards. I appreciate it. Thank you.